The waitress spilled soup. The Mafia boss stood before the manager could yell. The neon sign of the Starliner diner was dying. The R in Starliner flickered, buzzing like a trapped fly, casting a sickly pink glow on the wet pavement of St. Aurelia. This city didn't just have a lakeshore, it had a wound. The wind coming off that black water was cold enough to cut glass, and it always smelled of diesel and old oil. I was on my 4th consecutive shift. That's 24 hours straight, fueled by burnt coffee and the stale smoke smell clinging to my uniform. My feet were 2 separate blocks of pain, and my eyes felt like they were full of sand. I was Mara Quinn, and I was running on fumes. It happened in that slow-motion way disasters always do. The diner was packed with the late-night crowd dock workers ending their shift, drunk college kids, and the usual ghosts who had nowhere else to be. I was balancing a heavy tray, heading for table 6, a cauldron of seafood chowder. Thick and steaming was the main order. A drunk suit, his tie undone and his face flushed, lurched back from his booth just as I passed. He stumbled right into my path. I twisted, trying to save the tray, trying to save myself. It was useless. The tray tilted. The entire pot of scalding, creamy white soup went airborne. It splashed across the drunk's expensive leather shoes, but that wasn't the worst of it. The worst of it was the heavy spray that arced up and coated the front of my manager's shirt. Driggs. He had been storming over to yell at the drunk suit, and I had put him directly in the line of fire. The diner went silent. The sizzle of the soup hitting the floor was the only sound. I saw a clam slide slowly down Driggs's cheap polyester tie. His face, usually a pasty gray, went a deep, mottled purple. His mouth opened, a perfect O of fury, and I braced myself. This was it. This was the shout that would get me fired. This was the end of the paycheck I needed to keep the lights on. The end of the money for Jace. But the shout never came. A man sitting alone at the counter stood up. He hadn't been there 5 minutes ago. Or maybe he had been there all night. He was the kind of quiet that sinks into the background. He moved with an unsettling lack of hurry, placing his body directly between me and Driggs. He was tall, wearing a dark wool overcoat that probably cost more than my apartment's rent for a year. He didn't look at me. He looked only at Driggs. Driggs's mouth snapped shut. The purple in his face faded back to a sick, fish-belly white. The man didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. The air around him crackled. He reached into his coat and produced a wallet, sliding a single, heavy black card onto the counter. It made a quiet, definitive click against the formica. "This will cover the soup," he said. His voice was low, gravelly, like stones rolling in the tide, "and the gentleman's shoes, and a dry cleaning bill for your shirt." He paused, and his eyes, they were steel gray, flat and cold as the lake outside pinned Driggs to the floor. "She's still working." It wasn't a question. It was a statement of fact, a verdict. The drunk suit, suddenly sober, was wiping at his shoes with a napkin, muttering apologies to the floor. The other rowdy tables had gone quiet, their occupants suddenly fascinated by their coffee cups. This man hadn't just stopped Driggs. He had vacuumed the noise out of the entire room. I could feel the power coming off him in waves, a heavy, physical pressure. It felt like the air before a lightning strike. Driggs, to his credit, tried to puff himself up. He was a small man given a small amount of authority, and he hated having it challenged. "Now, you see here, sir, this is my employee, and she is a menace. That's property damage. I have a right." The man's gaze didn't waver. He didn't threaten. He just watched. And in that silence, Driggs just sort of deflated. The anger drained out of him, leaving that familiar, slimy layer of cowardice. He nodded, a jerky little spasm of his head, and scurried away toward his office, dripping chowder as he went. I finally let out the breath I'd been holding. My hands were shaking, not from fear of Driggs, but from the sudden, violent shift in the room's gravity. I was angry. Angry at myself for shaking, angry at the drunk, angry at the whole damn world that had me in this greasy apron. serving soup to idiots at 3 in the morning. I was used to being yelled at. I was used to being disposable. I wasn't used to being defended. I grabbed a rag and started cleaning up the floor, my movements stiff. My knuckles were white. I could feel him watching me. When I stood up, he was back at his seat, watching the grill cook. "I need a black coffee," he said to the air. I poured it. My hands were steadier now. I set it down in front of him. He hadn't touched the expensive-looking plate of food he'd ordered earlier. "Thank you," I said. The words tasted like ash. I didn't like being indebted, not even for a minute. He finally turned his head and looked at me. Really looked at me. It wasn't a leer. It wasn't the way men usually look at waitresses on the graveyard shift. It was analytical, quiet, like he was memorizing me. "What's your name?" "Mara." He nodded. Just once. "Mara." He said it like he was testing the weight of it. He took a sip of the coffee. He didn't look at me again. The tension in the diner slowly seeped back to its normal level. The drunk suit paid and left, leaving me a $20 bill on a $2 coffee, his hand shaking. The man in the overcoat finished his coffee 10 minutes later. He stood, leaving a $100 bill on the counter next to his full plate. He walked to the door. I watched him go, feeling a strange mix of relief and something else. Something I couldn't name. He paused at the door, turned, and walked back, not to me, but to the register, where the little stack of guest checks sat. He picked one up, took a pen from his coat, and wrote something on the back of it. He walked over and placed it on the counter, face down, right in front of me, then he left. I waited until the glass door swung shut, his dark form disappearing into the lakefront fog, before I picked it up. It wasn't a phone number, not his. Anyway, it was a name and a number. Rhea Calder. And underneath, 2 words. "If Driggs threatens you again, call this number." I shoved the paper into the pocket of my apron, my fingers brushing against the cold, greasy fabric. My shift wouldn't end for another 2 hours. 2 hours of wiping counters and pretending my life wasn't a slow-motion train wreck. Jace's medical bills were piled on my kitchen table, a monument to how far behind I was. The loan sharks Jace had borrowed from weren't the patient kind. I needed this job. I needed every single cent. Later that night, long after the diner had emptied and I was prepping for the breakfast rush, I saw them. 2 dark sedans parked across the street. They were expensive, clean, and completely out of place in this neighborhood. They sat there, engines off, silent sentinels in the rain. I tried to tell myself they were waiting for someone, that it was just a coincidence. But I saw the flare of a cigarette lighter in the front seat of one, and the driver's eyes seemed to catch the green light of the traffic monitor. They were watching the diner. My shift finally ended at 5 a.m. The city was gray and empty. Driggs was waiting for me by the employee exit. "Quinn," he hissed, his voice still slimy. "You're lucky that guy paid up, but I'm not running a charity. I've got a waiver here. Says you're responsible for all damages and breakage on your shifts from now on. Sign it or you're out." He held out a clipboard and a cheap pen. I looked at the paper. It was full of legal nonsense that basically signed away every right I had. I pushed the clipboard back at him. "I'm not signing that, Driggs." His eyes narrowed. "Then you're on your final warning. One more slip-up, one more broken plate, and you are gone. You hear me?" I just stared at him until he backed down, snatching the clipboard away. "Get out of here!" I pushed the door open and stepped out into the alley. The cold air hit me, thick with the smell of old grease and lake water. I pulled my thin jacket tighter and started walking toward the bus stop, my footsteps echoing off the brick walls. I only made it 10 feet. A figure stepped out from behind the dumpster, a man, thin and wiry, smelling of stale beer and desperation. "Hey," he grunted and his hand shot out, grabbing my wrist. "Driggs said you cost him money. Maybe you got something to make up for it." My blood ran cold. I tried to pull away, but his grip was like iron. He started to drag me deeper into the alley, away from the street. I opened my mouth to scream, but before any sound came out, a voice cut through the dark. "Let her go." The voice was quiet. It was the same voice from the diner. The man in the overcoat was standing at the mouth of the alley. He hadn't left, or he had come back. He was just there, a solid shadow against the gray morning light. My attacker froze. He looked from me to the man, his drug-addled confidence evaporating instantly. The man in the overcoat didn't move. He didn't pull a weapon. He didn't raise his hands. He just looked at the man holding me. It was the same look he had given Driggs, a look of finality. The wiry man let go of my wrist so fast I stumbled back against the wall. He held his hands up. "No trouble, man, no trouble." He scrambled backward, tripped over a pile of trash bags, and then vanished into the intersecting alleyway, running for his life. I was left alone, breathing hard, my heart hammering against my ribs. Marco Fiorini, though I didn't know his name yet, stepped fully into the alley. He looked at me, his gaze traveling from my face down to the wrist the man had grabbed, where red marks were already forming. His expression was unreadable, carved from stone. Then he just turned and walked away, disappearing around the corner onto the main street, leaving me alone in the silence of the dawn. The alley incident left a metallic taste in my mouth, one that no amount of stale coffee from the Starliner pot could wash away. I took another shift, then another. I wasn't just a waitress anymore. I was a stockroom mule. I spent 6 hours in the freezing walk-in, counting pickle jars and frozen meat patties, my breath pluming in front of my face. Then came the worst job in the building, cleaning the grease trap. I plunged my arms into the near-freezing water, the chemical sting of the degreaser biting into the cracks in my knuckles. My hands were raw, chapped red from the constant washing and the brutal St. Aurelia cold. The stench of rancid fat and old fry oil clung to my hair, my clothes. I scrubbed until my shoulders ached, motivated by the stack of paper on my kitchen table. Jace's medical bills were piling up like bricks, building a wall I couldn't climb. Each envelope was a crisp, white reminder of the infection that had nearly cost him his leg, and the specialist visits that were draining me dry. When I finally got home, shoving my key in the stiff lock, I found Jace at that same table, staring at the wall. He was pale, the way he always got when he was about to break bad news. "Mara," he started, his voice cracking. He couldn't meet my eyes. I did something. I thought it would help. I dropped my bag, the exhaustion hitting me like a physical blow. "What? Jace, what did you do?" "I got a job," he said, rubbing his hands on his jeans. "An audio testing gig. For the Euphoria exhibition, they paid $2,000, cash, just for a setup." My stomach tightened. The Euphoria exhibition was new, aggressively advertised, popping up in the old shipping warehouses. It was all sleek graphics and promises of immersive art. It felt fake. Jace, who paid you? Some guy said they needed a freelance engineer to check the acoustics in the main hall, said they were hanging new sound-dampening panels and needed a clean audio capture. He saw the look on my face and his defensiveness flared. It was good money. "Mara, I just had to place some high-sensitivity mics, run a few tests, but then they asked me to leave the equipment, said they'd run the diagnostic loops overnight." He didn't need to say the rest. They hadn't called him back. The money was already gone, eaten by the sharks before it even hit his hand. He hadn't just gotten a gig. He provided surveillance equipment for God knows who. The name Obsidian Reaches flashed in my mind. A bogeyman whispered about on the docks, a rival to the Argent Guild I'd only heard rumors about. The next morning, the bank called. A polite, dead voice informed me that my checking account, containing my last $431, was under a temporary administrative hold. A hold why I need that money. The hold was placed, Miss Quinn, in relation to an inquiry from Northbridge Financial regarding a defaulted loan agreement co-signed by you. I had never co-signed anything. That's a mistake. Jace took that loan. Yes, Miss Quinn. Northbridge Financial has initiated proceedings. The hold is non-negotiable pending review. The line clicked dead. Northbridge Financial, the clean, sterile name for the dirtiest loan sharks in St. Aurelia. They had Jace, and now They had me. Panic, cold and sharp, clawed its way up my throat. I couldn't pay rent, I couldn't buy food, and I would be fired the second Driggs found an excuse. I tore through my apron pocket from the night before. The receipt was still there, crumpled and smelling faintly of chowder. Rhea Calder. My fingers were shaking so badly I misdialed twice. On the third try, a voice answered. It was female, sharp, and utterly devoid of warmth. Yes. I'm looking for Rhea Calder. My name is Mara, a man in the diner. He gave me this number. He said to call if Driggs. Driggs is the least of your problems, the voice cut me off. Your brother and Northbridge. That's the problem. We know. My breath hitched. I just need my job. Can Mr. Fiorini just talk to Driggs? Tell him to back off. I can't lose this job. There was a silence on the line. So cold I thought she'd hung up. Then Rhea Calder spoke, her words precise as ice picks. Mr. Fiorini doesn't intervene in scheduling disputes. Mara, either you change your shift or you change your destiny. Your choice. The line went dead. I went to work. My head was spinning. Change your destiny. What did that even mean? The diner was slow. Snow had started to fall. Fat, wet flakes that melted on the pavement. I was wiping down the counter, my mind a million miles away, when she walked in. She was older, wrapped in a full-length mink coat that dripped melted snow onto the floor. Her hair was silver, pulled back in a severe knot, and her eyes were as sharp and predatory as a hawk's. She sat at the bar, not in a booth, and ordered nothing. Driggs came scurrying out of his office, wiping his hands on his apron, bowing and scraping like she was royalty. Lady Fen, he simpered. It's ready, just like you asked. He was holding a small, black USB drive. He held it between his thumb and forefinger, like it was a piece of garbage. Lady Fen didn't reach for it. She just nodded at the counter. Driggs placed it down. He was sweating. The logs are all there. Everything. You're sure her voice was like crushed velvet? Yes, every single one. I was pretending to fill the napkin dispensers, moving slowly down the bar. My heart was pounding. Rhea's words echoed in my head. Change your destiny. This was it. This was a choice. I moved past them, rag in hand, heading for the coffee station. As I passed, my elbow hooked the edge of my plastic utility caddy, the gray tub where we tossed dirty rags and silverware. I let my arm swing wide, just an inch. My elbow connected with the USB drive. It skittered off the counter and fell with a quiet plink into the bottom of my caddy, disappearing instantly under a pile of damp napkins and spoons. Clumsy Driggs snapped at me, his face pale with terror. Lady Fen's eyes snapped to me. They were cold, assessing. She looked at Driggs with utter contempt. Control your help. I'm so sorry, ma'am. So sorry, I stammered, my face burning. I think it fell on the floor. Let me look. I ducked behind the counter, pretending to search, my hands shaking. I can't see it. Driggs. It must have skidded under the ice machine. You useless girl, he hissed. Get out of my way. He dropped to his hands and knees, huffing and puffing as he searched the filthy floor. Lady Fen watched him for a long, disgusted moment. Then she stood, smoothing her coat. Find it, and bring it to the usual place. Do not disappoint me again, Driggs. She swept out of the diner, leaving the scent of expensive perfume and cold fur. I didn't breathe until my shift ended. I emptied the caddy in the back room, my fingers finding the small, hard shape of the USB drive among the wet rags. I slipped it into my pocket. The walk home was a nightmare. The snow was coming down harder, muffling the city sounds, making everything feel close and claustrophobic. I clutched the drive in my pocket, my knuckles white. I was 2 blocks from my apartment when I heard the engines. 2 motorcycles, their headlights cutting through the snow. They pulled up on either side of me, sandwiching me on the empty sidewalk. Nice night for a walk, Mara, the first rider, said. He wore a helmet, his voice distorted by the visor. Northbridge sends regards, the second one said. They're very interested in your brother's work, and they'd like to know what Driggs gave you. I bolted, I ran, slipping on the wet snow, my lungs burning. One of them gunned his engine, cutting me off, the front wheel of his bike spinning inches from my legs. The first rider dismounted, lunging for me. I ducked, and his gloved hand swiped at the air where my head had been. I scrambled, seeing the neon sign of a 24-hour laundromat halfway down the block. It was my only chance. I sprinted, hit the door with my shoulder, and tumbled inside, collapsing against a row of humming dryers. The smell of bleach and hot fabric filled my lungs. I was safe. For a second. The door opened behind me. I pushed myself back, crab-walking away, my eyes wide. It wasn't the bikers. It was him, Marco Fiorini. He was standing just inside the doorway, the snow melting on the shoulders of his dark overcoat. He wasn't winded, he wasn't surprised. He looked at me, huddled on the linoleum floor, and then his gaze dropped to my right hand, which was still clenched tightly in my pocket. "That doesn't belong to Driggs," he said, his voice that same quiet rumble, "and it doesn't belong to you." His apartment wasn't an apartment. It was a glass box on top of one of the oldest buildings in the city, overlooking the black, churning water of the lake. He hadn't asked me to come. He'd simply opened the door of his car, and I had gotten in. He slid the USB drive into the side of a sleek, encrypted laptop that looked more like military hardware than a computer. He didn't say a word. The screen lit up. It wasn't a spreadsheet. It was a video file. But it was organized like a ledger. Dates, times, and amounts. Fundraising activities MCIA, the header read. Midland Chain Inspection Authority. I'd never heard of them. "They're not real," Marco said, anticipating my question. "The MCIA is a ghost, a shell company with a very official-sounding name. Obsidian Reaches created it." He clicked on a file. The video was grainy, low light. It showed the main hall of the Euphoria exhibition, but the art wasn't on the walls. Men were moving crates. "Look closer." He zoomed in. A man was prying open a crate marked with a pharmaceutical logo. Inside wasn't medicine. It was stacks of cash. He zoomed in on another crate. They were swapping paintings. A modern, vibrant original was being replaced by a nearly identical copy. "Obsidian Reaches is using the exhibition to wash money," he explained, his voice low. "But that's the small game. The real product is in the refrigerated containers." He clicked another file. This one showed men in clean suits examining vials, bio-counterfeits, fake pharmaceuticals, insulin, antibiotics. They look real. They pass initial customs scans, but they're chalk and sugar water. They're shipping them out using the same routes as the artwork. He looked at me, his steel gray eyes seeing straight through me. The fundraising list from the MCIA matches the shipping manifests for the containers. It's their entire operation. Mara, their buyers, their suppliers, their routes. A cold, horrifying realization washed over me. I finally understood. "Chase," I whispered. "My brother, his audio job." Marco nodded slowly. The exhibition hall mics, they weren't testing them. They were using them. This isn't just a video ledger. He clicked one more file. This time, there was audio. I heard Lady Fenn's velvet voice, clear as a bell, discussing percentages. I heard another man, his voice rough, confirming a shipment date. "Jace didn't just get stiffed on a job," Marco said. He installed the surveillance system that recorded every illegal conversation Obsidian Reaches has had for the last 2 weeks. I looked at the USB drive, still plugged into his laptop. It wasn't just evidence. It was a weapon. It was the whole game. And I had stolen it from the diner, right from under their noses. Ria's words came back to me. "Change your destiny." I looked up at the most dangerous man in St. Aurelia. I had the feeling my destiny had just been chained to his. He didn't take me back to the office. He led me up a final, narrow flight of stairs, a private key turning in a heavy lock. When he pushed the door open, the air changed. It was no longer the smell of the city, of diesel and frost. This was warm, damp, and alive. It smelled of rich earth, sharp rosemary, and the sweet tang of citrus. We were in a greenhouse. A massive glass dome arched over the roof of the building. a bubble of life suspended over the glittering, frozen sprawl of St. Aurelia. In the center, a small fountain trickled. Pots of mandarin trees were clustered near the glass, and long, neat beds of herbs ran along the walkways. It was called the Glass Hollow. It wasn't a sterile display of wealth. It wasn't meant to impress. It was a place to breathe. "Sit," Marco said. His voice was softer here, swallowed by the humidity and the gentle sound of water. He gestured to a simple, unadorned iron bench. I sat, but I couldn't relax. The shock of the USB drive's contents, of Jace's involvement, was still vibrating through me. Marco moved to a small alcove where an electric kettle sat next to a bag of loose-leaf tea. He didn't look at me as he spoke, his back to me as he measured out the leaves. "I was born in West Briar," he said, his voice aimed at the glass, at the city lights below. "It's the other side of the docks, the one the city council pretends isn't there. You know it." I nodded. Though he couldn't see me, I knew it. Lantern District, where I grew up. Bordered it. West Briar was where you ended up when Lantern felt too optimistic. I didn't build what I have by being nice. Mara, I built it by being necessary. He poured the steaming water into 2 simple ceramic cups. The Argent Guild exists because the port needs balance. Obsidian reaches. They deal in filth. The bio-counterfeits, weapons, trafficking. They poison the city from the inside out. He turned, holding a cup in each hand. He walked over and offered one to me. "I just coordinate," he continued, setting the cup on the bench as I was too slow to take it. "I protect the gray merchants, the ones who move real televisions, or textiles, or liquor, but don't want to pay the city's ridiculous tariffs. I keep the docks clean of their kind of product." He finally met my gaze, and the steel was back. I don't deal in contraband, and I don't let them do it on my turf. I looked from his steady gaze to the cup of tea. The steam rose in a fragrant curl. "I don't believe in good bad guys. Mr. Fiorini." "Marco." The correction was quiet, but firm. "Marco," I repeated. The name felt heavy on my tongue. "I don't believe in crime bosses with hearts of gold. I've seen too much on the night shift to believe in fairy tales." I finally reached for the cup. The heat was a shock, a sudden, grounding pain against my chapped fingers. But I believe what I saw at the Starliner. I believe in the way you stood between me and Driggs. That was specific. That was real. I looked up at him. "What is this?" "This," he said, taking a sip of his own tea, "is a problem. Obsidian Reaches is bleeding my city, and now they have your brother tangled up in their mess. And that USB drive, you just stole their entire playbook." Before I could process that, his phone vibrated, a harsh buzz on the iron bench. He picked it up, his thumb swiping across the screen. I watched his expression harden, the lines around his mouth deepening. "Rhea," he said, more to himself than to me. He read the message. "Driggs has disappeared, vanished. Not home, not at the diner. He's in the wind." My stomach hollowed out. "And Lady Fenn just moved up the timeline." He continued, his eyes scanning the text. "She's holding a blessing. That's what she calls her private auctions tonight. Not tomorrow. Tonight. She's changed the venue." "Where?" "The Aurelian Aquarium." Looked at me, and I saw a new, calculating light in his eyes. The warmth of the greenhouse was gone. The old building downtown. It's antique, private, and very, very secure. He leaned forward. The space between us, which had felt safe, suddenly felt charged. "Here is the truth. Mara. Northbridge Financial is a subsidiary of Obsidian Reaches. A clean face for their dirty money. They didn't just give Jace a loan. They put a leash on him. They used him to plant those mics, and now they are using you to squeeze him. They want that drive back before whatever is on it ruins them." "What do you want?" I asked. My voice was a whisper. "I want to shut them down. I want to use that drive to expose them, to cut them out of the docks for good. But to do that, I need to get inside that auction. And Lady Fenn knows my face. She knows the face of every man and woman who works for me." He paused, his gaze intense. "But she doesn't know yours." My heart, which had been pounding, seemed to stop altogether. What? What are you asking me to do? The auction is being catered, a private, high-end service. It's the only way in and out of that building tonight that isn't locked down by fence security. You're a waitress. Mara, you're invisible. You know how to move in those rooms, how to carry a tray and be overlooked. I need you to be my guide. Get me inside. Be my eyes. Help me plant the rest of this data where it can do the most damage. And if I do this, I felt breathless. What about Jace? What about the debt? Those men on the motorcycles? If you help me, Marco said, and his voice was flat, absolute, a vow made of iron. I will make Northbridge Financial disappear from your life. The debt will be erased. Your bank account will be yours again. And I will get Jace out of this city, somewhere safe, before they can touch him again. I will give you your life back. My life, the one that smelled like grease traps and stale coffee, the one defined by a stack of red-inked bills. My pride screamed at me to refuse, to throw the hot tea in his handsome, dangerous face and run. I was nobody's tool. I was tired of being pushed around by men in expensive coats, by loud-mouthed managers, by desperate, unseen predators. But the truth was a cold, hard stone in my stomach. The truth was the image of Jace, pale and scared. The truth was the administrative hold on my last $431. I looked down at the cup in my hands. My fingers were wrapped so tightly around it that my knuckles were white. I consciously relaxed them, letting the ceramic's warmth seep into the cracks in my skin. It felt like the first solid, real thing I had held in months. It felt like a decision. Okay, I said, and my voice didn't shake. I'll do it. Marco watched her. He had kept his distance, a deliberate space between them on the bench. But he had seen everything. He saw the exhaustion etched into the fine lines around her eyes, the stubborn set of her jaw. He saw the way her shoulders slumped, not in defeat, but under a weight she had carried for far too long. His gaze drifted to her hands, wrapped around the cup. He saw the raw, red cracks on her knuckles, the mark of cheap soap and scalding water and chemical degreaser. He remembered the white-hot, possessive fury he felt watching Driggs loom over her at the Starliner. This was the exact kind of person he'd built the guild to protect. The ordinary people caught in the gears, and here he was, asking her to walk directly into the fire. Good, he said, his voice softer than he intended. We don't have much time. The next few hours were a blur. We left the glass hollow and returned to his office. The laptop, now the center of our universe. Rhea Calder arrived. She was a shadow in a perfectly tailored suit, her dark hair pulled back so tightly it looked painful. She didn't smile. She simply opened her own laptop and laid out blueprints of the Aurelian Aquarium. We have a contact in the catering company, Rhea said, her voice all business. You're a last-minute replacement. Mara Quinn, assistant catering lead. You'll have a uniform and a key card. It gets you into the service halls, the main floor, and the kitchen. Nothing more. And me, Marco asked? You, Rhea said, tapping the screen to bring up a polished invitation, are Niccolo Vieri, an independent art consultant from Milan, interested in new wave acquisitions. You have a verified invite. You'll be on the floor, but you'll be watched. They started rehearsing. It was like watching a play, with stakes that made my stomach churn. If I adjust my left cuff, Marco said, demonstrating, it means I see a guard. If I adjust the right, it means they are guild-related, but not obsidian. If I touch my glass, it means they're watching you. If I switch the tray to my left hand, I offered, my old waitress muscle memory kicking in, it means I'm clear. If I switch to my right, it means I'm being followed. Marco nodded, a small, brief flicker of approval in his eyes. Good. Use what you know. You're not a spy. You're a waitress. Be tired, be annoyed, be invisible. With every exchange, every coordinated signal, a strange, terrifying thread of trust began to weave between us. It was almost dawn when we finished. Rhea had left, melting back into the city. The snow outside had softened, changing from fat flakes to a fine, silvery dust that coated the windows. I stood at the door to the private elevator, my nerves raw and exposed. "I need to go home," I said, my voice thin. "I need to check on Jace, get my head straight." "Ria's men are watching your building," Marco assured me, his voice low. "Northbridge won't get close to him, not tonight." He walked me to the elevator. The cold from the lobby's shaft washed over us as the doors opened. I shivered, wearing the same thin jacket I'd worn in the alley 24 hours ago. It felt like a lifetime. He watched me shiver, just once. He didn't hesitate. He took off his own heavy wool overcoat, the one from the diner, the one that smelled faintly of the cold night air and something else, something warm and distinctly him. He didn't hand it to me. He stepped close, into my space, and draped it over my shoulders. The weight of it was staggering, a sudden warm burden. It enveloped me. The sleeves hanging past my hands, the hem brushing my knees. I looked up at him, startled. His hands rested on the shoulders of the coat for just a moment, not holding me, just settling the fabric. It wasn't an act of possession. It wasn't a claim. It was a silent question. A gesture of protection that felt as solid and real as the way he'd stood in front of Driggs. "The car is waiting downstairs," he said, his voice quiet. The elevator doors opened. I stepped in, clutching the thick lapels of his coat, drowning in the warmth and his scent. As the doors started to slide shut, my phone buzzed in my jeans pocket. I fumbled for it, pulling it out, my heart suddenly seizing. It was a picture message from an unknown number. My blood turned to ice. It was Jace. He was tied to a simple wooden chair. His face was bruised, his left eye swollen, and his mouth was covered with silver duct tape. Behind him, on a damp brick wall, 2 letters were spray-painted in fresh, wet red paint. And then R. "Northbridge?" A second text came through immediately, a single line of type. "The drive, 48 hours, or the next picture is his last." The elevator doors sealed, closing me in, but not before I saw Marco's eyes widen, his face hardening into a mask of cold, terrible fury as he saw the screen in my hand. The elevator doors opened to a scene of controlled chaos. The 48-hour deadline had shrunk to 8. The text message had turned Marco's controlled strategy into a rescue operation. Ria Calder was already waiting in his office, which now looked like a war room. The glass walls were dark, the only light coming from a massive, glowing schematic projected onto the main wall. It was the Aurelian Aquarium. "The photo of Jace was geotagged," Ria said, her voice clipping each word. "A defunct warehouse in the Briar District. My team is moving on it now. But it's a trap, Marco. They left the tag intentionally. They want you to split your forces." Marco stared at the picture of Jace, his jaw set so tight a muscle jumped. "They're right, I won't. We stick to the primary objective. We get the leverage, we make the trade, get Jace out after we have Fen cornered." He looked at me, his eyes dark. "Can you still do this?" I nodded, my throat too tight to speak. My fear for Jace was a cold, hard knot, but it was being overtaken by a white-hot rage. "Good," Ria said, turning to the schematic. "The Aurelian Aquarium. Built in 1932, it's a fortress of marble and reinforced glass. Lady Fen's security will be on every public entrance, but they won't be here." She tapped a section of the blueprint marked in red, the main filtration system. It's an underground network of tunnels that pulls water directly from the lake. This main access conduit runs from a storm drain 2 blocks away, passes under the street, and surfaces directly beneath the main exhibit. She zoomed in on the central showpiece. The river under glass. It's a suspended walkway. Guests walk over a massive, shallow tank designed to mimic the riverbed. That's where the auction is. The conduit surfaces in a service room right off the main pumps. It's our only way in. "The plan has changed," Marco said, his voice flat. "This isn't just about planting data anymore. We're using the drive to buy your brother's life." "We can do both," Ria countered, her eyes gleaming. "We upload a copy of the video ledger to their secure network, but the file itself is the trap. It's a signature file. The moment Lady Fenn's system accesses it, it activates, bridges their firewall, and copies her entire counterfeit ledger. The real one. The one she keeps off-site straight to us. We won't just expose Euphoria, we'll burn her whole biopharma chain to the ground. My training began immediately. Rhea thrust a uniform at me, black pants, a stiff white shirt, a gray vest. It was identical to the Starliner, just more expensive fabric. Then came the tray. "You're not clumsy," Mara, Rhea said, placing a dozen empty champagne flutes on the silver tray. "You're distracted. At the Starliner, you spilled because you were tired. Tonight, you will be precise." I lifted the tray. It was heavy, unbalanced. "You're a ghost," Marco said, circling me. He was no longer the man from the greenhouse. He was a general. "You walk. You see everything. You look at no one." I practiced for an hour, walking, turning, stopping short. He'd suddenly step in my path, and I'd have to pivot without rattling a single glass. He taught me how to use the tray as a shield, as a feint. "If you're cornered, you don't drop it," he instructed, his voice low. "You aim it. A tray full of glass at face height will stop anyone. It's not a spill. It's a weapon." Then he taught me to see. "Don't look at faces," he said. "Look at hands and feet. Look at shoes. Security wears comfortable. Rubber-soled dress shoes, polished but practical. The buyers wear Italian leather, thin soles. They make a different sound on the marble." He pointed to a spot on the blueprint, the shark tank. It's a 20-foot-high cylinder. People get mesmerized. Watch their breathing when a sand tiger glides by. The guards won't look. The buyers will hold their breath. Just for a second, that's how you tell them apart in the dark. At 7 p.m., I was in the staff locker room of the Aurelian Aquarium. The air smelled of chlorine and industrial soap. My heart was a cold bird beating against my ribs. I was pinning my hair into a tight, professional bun when a man sat on the bench behind me. "Tough gig," he said. I saw his reflection in the metal locker. He was handsome in a cheap, predatory way, wearing a security uniform that fit him too tightly across the shoulders. He was whistling, a low, tuneless sound. Heard they called in last-minute replacements. "Something like that," I said, keeping my eyes down. "Yeah, lots of reorganization happening tonight." He leaned closer. I could smell the mint on his breath. It's a shame when good help gets tangled up in bad business. Like that kid, Jace. Owe a lot of money to Northbridge, I hear. My blood froze. I turned slowly. "Name's Crispin Holt," he said, giving me a bright, empty smile. "I manage acquisitions for Northbridge." "You're the one who sent me that picture." "Just a business update," he said cheerfully. "But I'm a reasonable man. Lady Fenn, she wants that USB drive. She's willing to forgive the original debt and your brother's mistake. In exchange for it, just the drive. No copy." I stared at him, letting my face show the panic I felt. I don't have it with me. They made me leave it." "I figured," he said, not a trace of disappointment in his voice. He was enjoying this. "But you can get it. Tell you what, you bring a copy, we'll know if it's real to the parking garage. Level 2, after your shift, give it to me. And Jace's debt is clear. Simple as that." I pretended to think, to agonize. "A copy. How do I—" Okay. Parking garage, level 2, after the auction." Crispin's smile widened. "Atta girl. Knew you were smart." He stood up, pulling a small metal business card holder from his pocket. He tapped it against his palm, his smile never wavering. He didn't know that Rhea had already dusted the locker room's main door handle, the bench, and the keypad with a fine, UV-reactive powder. It was already marked. The tunnel was hell. It smelled of rust, dead fish, and the ozone tang of the massive pumps. The only light came from Marco's penlight. The noise was deafening, a constant, deep thud, thud, thud that vibrated in my chest. We reached a gap. A section of the walkway had rusted away, leaving a 10-foot drop to a churning sluice of black water below. The only way across was a single, 4-inch-wide iron I-beam, slick with algae and condensation. "I can't," I whispered, my voice lost in the din. Marco didn't argue. He didn't offer encouragement. He just turned, his back to me. "Get on." "What?" "On my back. Now, Mara, we don't have time." I hesitated for only a second. I put my arms around his neck, my chest pressing against his broad back. He adjusted me, one arm hooking under my legs, and lifted me as if I weighed nothing. I wrapped my legs around his waist, my face pressed against the side of his neck. He felt solid, warm, a living thing in this concrete tomb. He started across the beam. My world shrank to the feel of his muscles contracting under his shirt, the scent of his skin clean, sharp, metallic, and the sound of his breathing, steady and controlled, inches from my ear. Our breath mingled, white plumes in the beam of his light, dissolving into the roar of the pumps. He took a step. The beam was slick. He shifted, his hand finding a purchase on a wet conduit. I felt his heart, a strong, steady beat against my own frantic rhythm. He didn't rush. He was all balance and deliberate force, one step, then another. I held on to him, my grip so tight my knuckles ached, in that moment suspended over the black water. He was the only solid thing in the universe. My cheek was pressed against his shoulder, and I realized my heart wasn't just pounding from fear. It had synced with his, a driving, powerful, two-part harmony. It was the most intimate contact I'd ever known. He reached the other side and let me slide down, my feet hitting the concrete. My hands lingered on his shoulders for a second longer than necessary. His hand was on my back, steadying me. We stood there, eyes locked in the dark, the roar of the water filling the silence between us. He didn't let go. I didn't step away. Then a red light blinked on Ria's tablet, which was strapped to his arm. We're at the hatch. We emerged into a small, chlorine-scented room. The auction hall was breathtaking. We were in a massive circular room, and the entire floor was a thick glass panel. Below our feet, the river under glass flowed a curated, brilliantly lit tank filled with exotic fish, stingrays, and artificial reeds. In the center of the room, a 10-foot-wide column of water rose to the ceiling, containing 3 massive, circling sand tiger sharks. The walls were all glass, looking out into the main aquarium's darkness. I grabbed my tray of champagne. Marco, now Niccolo Vieri, in a flawless Italian suit, blended into the crowd of billionaires. Lady Fen took the podium. She was radiant, her silver hair gleaming. "Friends," she said, her velvet voice amplified, "art is a game of memory. We buy a piece not for what it is, but for what it reminds us of, the power it holds." An attendant in a lab coat wheeled out a polished steel rack. It held not a painting, but a series of sealed, blue liquid-filled vials. "Tonight's masterpiece," Fen continued, "is a memory of health, a promise of vitality. We will start the bidding for this exclusive lot at $4 million. The bio-counterfeits, right out in the open." Marco, standing near the shark tank, caught my eye. He gave the signal, a just right cuff. He had spotted Ria's people, disguised as guests. He then lifted his champagne flute, a silent toast in my direction, instead of memory, he said, his voice just loud enough for the table nearest him to hear. "Let's try truth." That was it, the signal. I watched Ria, disguised as a bidder, tap her phone screen. For a second, nothing happened. Then, every auxiliary screen in the room, the ones showing the lot numbers, the ones displaying the art, flickered. They went black, and then they filled with streaming, green, encrypted code. Ria's signature trap was in, the upload had begun. A man at Lady Fen's side, the same one from Jace's video, saw it. His eyes went wide. He grabbed her arm. "We're breached. The network is breached." Lady Fen's smile didn't falter, but her eyes turned to ice. She pressed a button on her podium. A deafening security siren blared, a piercing shriek that echoed off the glass. The room panicked, guests shouted, surging toward the exits. And in the tank, the sharks, agitated by the noise and the sudden vibration, began to swim faster. They slammed against the glass, their movements frantic, Their dark eyes rolling, they circled and circled and circled, a living, churning vortex of teeth and primal fury, a perfect clock signaling the storm that had just broken. The alarm was a physical assault, a high-pitched scream that vibrated off the glass and water. The crowd was a stampede, a mess of tuxedos and silk dresses shoving toward the main atrium. I lost Marco in the surge. I ducked behind a velvet rope, following the illuminated green staff-only signs. My catering tray still gripped in my hand. My instincts screamed at me to find the service hallway I'd come in from. I shoved through a set of double doors and found myself in a long, dark corridor. It was the jellyfish forest. The only light came from floor-to-ceiling cylindrical tanks, casting a pulsing, ghostly blue glow. Hundreds of translucent jellyfish drifted like phantoms in the water. It was beautiful and utterly terrifying. A heavy thud click echoed from behind me, the magnetic lock on the doors I'd just come through. Going somewhere, Mara. Crispin Holt stood at the far end of the hall, bathed in the blue light, his smile a white slash in the dark. I spun around. Another security guard, this one built like a refrigerator, blocked the doors behind me. I was boxed in. "I told you," Crispin said, taking a slow step toward me. "Parking garage. After the shift. You just couldn't wait. Lady Fenn is very unhappy with you. Now give me the drive and I'll make this quick." He was 10 feet away. The guard behind me was closer. I was a rat in a glass trap. A shadow detached itself from a maintenance alcove halfway down the hall. It was Marco, when he was just there, a sudden, solid presence in the pulsing blue light before Crispin could even register him. Marco moved. He crossed the space in 2 long, silent strides, grabbed my arm and yanked me backward. He didn't pull me to safety. He pulled me into him, spinning us both into the same dark alcove he'd emerged from. He pressed me hard against the concrete wall, his body a shield, his hand clamping over my mouth just as the 2 guards sprinted past our hiding spot, their footsteps pounding in the sudden silence. "Where did she go?" Crispin's voice echoed, frantic. "Find her. Find Fiorini." They ran past. We were hidden in a 2-foot-deep recess, a pocket of absolute black in the glowing blue corridor. My entire body was rigid. Marco was pressed against me from shoulder to knee. I could feel the hard lines of his chest, the solid muscle of his thigh. My face was turned, pressed against his suit jacket. I could smell the faint, sharp scent of chlorine from the tanks, and under it, the warm, human scent of his skin. His hand was no longer over my mouth, but had moved to my shoulder, gripping it. It wasn't rough, it was firm, possessive, a silent anchor. I was breathing in short, shallow gasps. His breath was hot on my temple. And then I heard it, under the distant alarm, under the hum of the tanks. I heard his heart. It was not the frantic rabbit thump of my own. It was a deep, steady, powerful thud. Thud, thud against my ear. The calm, terrifying rhythm of a man who lived in this chaos. He leaned his head down, his lips brushing the shell of my ear. "Trust me," he whispered. The words were a vibration more than a sound. My eyes squeezed shut. All the fear, all the exhaustion from the diner, the grease trap, the terror for Jace had all collapsed into one single point of focus. Him, this man, this moment. I breathed back. It was the truest thing I'd said in years. A spark that had been hovering since he stood up at the Starliner finally caught fire. He let me go, and he took my hand. "Run!" We burst from the alcove, running in the opposite direction of Crispin. We slammed through a door marked Stingray Bay and found ourselves on a high-arched glass bridge below us in a massive open-top tank. A dozen stingrays looped and glided through the water like flat, silent ghosts. "There, stop them!" Crispin's roar echoed from the jellyfish hall. Marco didn't look back, just pulled me forward, his grip like iron. Our feet hammered on the glass. I felt like I was running on air, the dark shapes of the rays flying beneath my feet. Crispin was behind us, his heavier footsteps gaining. Marco saw the exit. It wasn't an exit. It was a metal door. Technical access 04. He hit it with his shoulder, grabbed my arm and pulled me inside, slamming it shut just as Crispin's hand grabbed for me. I heard a muffled curse and the heavy thud of his body hitting the door. We were in absolute darkness. The air was hot, smelling of ozone and lubricant. I stumbled, and Marco's hands found my waist, steadying me. "It's a service elevator," he said, his voice tight in the small space. He fumbled for the panel, and I heard the click of a button. With a groan of metal, the elevator began to descend. It was a cage, barely 4 feet square. We stood facing the wall, our backs pressed together, shoulder blade to shoulder blade, the tension a living thing in the pitch black. I could feel the rise and fall of his chest as he breathed. I was vibrating. My nerves shot. His back was a solid wall of heat. The elevator stopped with a sudden, jarring thump that threw me off balance. I fell back. He turned. His hands caught my shoulders. I was facing him now, but the darkness was so complete I could only sense him. He was close enough to feel the heat radiating from his body. He didn't move. I didn't move. I could hear him breathing. I could hear me breathing. The silence was heavier than the alarm had been. His eyes, I knew, were on me. I felt his gaze like a physical touch. He was afraid. It rolled off him in waves, an emotion so raw it shocked me. It wasn't fear of Crispin or the guards, or the guns I knew they had. It was fear of this, of me, here, in this with him. Fear of losing me. One of his hands moved from my shoulder. His fingers, warm and calloused, traced the line of my jaw, then slid to the back of my neck, his thumb resting just below my ear. His touch was hesitant, asking a question I didn't know how to answer. So I answered it. I leaned into his hand just a fraction of an inch. It was all he needed. The kiss was not what I expected. It wasn't the desperate, frantic clash of 2 people running for their lives. It was slow. It was deliberate. It was a commitment. His lips met mine with a steady, searching pressure. A promise being signed in the dark. It was a drowning man finding air. His hand held my head, fingers tangled in the hair I had pinned up, tilting my face to his. It wasn't about passion or lust. It was about finding a single, solid point in a world that had dissolved into chaos. It was the diner. It was the alley. It was the I-beam in the tunnel. It was him, grounding me, saying without words, "You are here. You are with me." A sharp ding echoed from outside, and the elevator doors opened, flooding the space with the cold, blue-white light of the loading bay. The sound of heavy boots on concrete, getting closer. We broke apart, our breath plumed in the cold air, mingling between us. We hadn't moved away, his hand still on my neck, mine flat against his chest, where his heart was now hammering as fast as my own. His eyes, dark and intense, held mine. "North," he whispered, his voice rough, "the riverbank." We moved as one, slipping out of the elevator and into the shadows of the loading bay. We ran, past empty animal carriers and stacks of salt bags, and burst out a side door into the freezing night air. We were at the private moorings. The black, oily water of the St. Aurelia River lapped against the pilings. A single, rusty tugboat was 10 feet from the dock, its engine churning, pulling away. And on the deck, tied to a chair just as he was in the picture, was Jace. "Mara," he screamed, his voice muffled. "We're too late," I gasped. "No, we're not." Lady Fenn stepped out of the tugboat's cabin. She was no longer in her auction gown. She was in practical black pants and a dark coat, her silver hair pulled back. She held a phone to her ear. "An impressive performance. Mr. Fiorini," she called out, her voice carrying easily over the water. "And you, little waitress, you have something of mine." She held up her phone. The screen was black. "The drive, now. Or your brother takes a swim he won't come back from." "Give it to her," Marco said, his eyes on Jace. "But the data—" "Give it to her." I pulled the dummy USB from my pocket, the one Rhea had given me. Here I yelled, my voice shaking. "Take it, just let him go." "Toss it," Fenn commanded. I threw it. The small black drive arced over the water, landing on the deck at her feet. She bent, picked it up, and examined it. She smiled, a thin, cruel smile. She slotted it into a small adapter on her phone. From the roof of the warehouse behind us, I saw a single, tiny red light. Rhea. The screen on Fenn's phone lit up, but it wasn't a file directory. It was a rapid, scrolling list of her own contacts, her bank transfers, her shipping logs. Rhea's trap was working. It wasn't just downloading the file, it was emptying her phone. Lady Fenn's smile vanished. She looked at the screen, her face twisting in pure rage. "You little—" "Cut the line, cut it now," she screamed at the captain. The tugboat's engine roared, the gap of black water widening. Marco didn't wait. He took a running start and leaped. He cleared the water, landing hard on the railing, tumbling onto the deck. He was up in an instant, a knife I never knew he had in his hand. He sliced through the ropes, holding Jace just as the first sirens hit. Blue and red lights flashed across the water. 2 Aurelian Port Office patrol boats were speeding toward us, their spotlights pinning the tugboat. "APO," a voice boomed over a loudspeaker. "Cut your engines now." On the dock, Crispin Holt burst from the loading bay, his gun drawn. "Freeze, Fiorini." He never saw Rhea Calder step out of the shadows behind him. There was the sharp, solid thwack of her stun gun, and Crispin went down like a sack of rocks. Rhea calmly produced a set of zip ties and cuffed him. On the boat, Marco was dragging a terrified Jace toward the railing. The APO boat was closing in. Lady Fenn looked at Marco. She looked at the approaching police. She looked at me, her eyes burning with a hatred that chilled me to the bone. Then, with a calm, deliberate movement, she climbed onto the railing and dove. She hit the black, oily water without a splash and vanished. Marco pulled Jace onto the APO boat. The fight was over. Jace was safe. But Lady Fenn was gone. The war had just begun. Refinery Row was nothing like the glass hollow. It was the Argent Guild's heart, hidden inside a reclaimed distillery in West Briar. The air smelled of old wood, copper, and roasting coffee. It was warm, solid, and real. A man I'd never seen, with the steady hands of a surgeon and the scarred knuckles of a fighter, was stitching the cut over Jace's eye. Jace was sitting on a workbench, wrapped in a thick wool blanket, shaking. When he saw me, his face crumpled. "Mara, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I thought I could fix it. The money—" "Shut up, Jace," I said, but my voice was thick. I crossed the room and pulled his head against my stomach, my hand going to the back of his hair. He was alive. He was bruised and terrified, but he was here. Just shut up and be safe. Marco stood by the door, watching. He'd shrugged off his own soaking wet overcoat, tossing it onto a steel chair. The adrenaline that had kept me moving for the last 8 hours, or maybe it was the last 2 days. I couldn't tell chose that moment to abandon me. My knees buckled. A violent shiver racked my entire body, so hard my teeth clacked together. It wasn't from the cold. It was the crash. The terror I'd been holding back flooded in, and I couldn't feel my hands. Marco was there before I hit the floor. He didn't grab me. He just put a hand on my elbow and another on my back, steering me into an adjoining room, away from Jace and the doctor. It was a small, quiet office, paneled in dark, reclaimed wood. A single soft yellow lamp burned on a desk. Rain had begun to fall, lashing against the windows, a welcome change from the snow. He sat me down in a deep leather armchair. I couldn't stop shaking. He disappeared for a moment and came back not with brandy, but with 2 large mugs. He pressed one into my hands. It was hot, and it smelled of dark chocolate, hot cocoa. The gesture was so unexpectedly gentle it nearly broke me. He sat in the chair opposite me, just 1 arm's length away. He respected the line. He just sat, sipping his own cocoa, watching the rain and letting me breathe. "You're good at that," I said finally, my voice a rasp. "At what?" "Standing in front of people." I took a sip. The heat was a shock, scalding my throat, but it steadied my hands. I grew up in the Lantern District. My mother left when I was 9. My father, he was a gambler. He was loud when he lost, and he was loud when he won. I learned how to stand straight when a big man is yelling in your face. I learned how to make myself small, how to take the hit, how to just endure. I looked at the mug, at the cracks in my own knuckles, illuminated by the lamplight, but tonight, in the aquarium with Crispin, I wasn't enduring, I was just scared. If you hadn't been there... But I was, he said, his voice low. He looked into the darkness of his mug. I wasn't always this. When I was just starting, trying to build the guild, I had a friend. Knew him from West Briar. He worked the bar at a place called the Crow's Nest. He wasn't in the life. He was just a guy. Good with a joke, quick with a drink. His grip tightened on the ceramic. A former boss, one of the old guard, got angry about a shipment. He decided to send a message. He walked into the Crow's Nest and he hurt my friend badly, all to prove a point. My friend died 2 days later, for nothing, because he was convenient, because he was standing behind a counter. He finally looked up, and his eyes were steel, but the steel was molten. I built my laws after that, and the first one is simple. You don't touch the people who work. You don't touch the person pouring the coffee, or driving the cab, or serving the soup. They are not in the game. You stand in front of them, always. We sat in silence. The only sounds were the rain and the distant, muffled murmur of the doctor's voice. He had answered the question I'd had since the Starliner. He hadn't just saved a waitress. He'd been saving his friend. I reached across the small space between our chairs. I didn't grab his hand. I just laid my fingers, light and hesitant, on the back of his skin was warm. I felt the tendons shift as he tensed, and then slowly, deliberately, relax under my touch. It was a simple, quiet gesture, a signal that the boundary was gone. He turned his hand over, his fingers lacing with mine. He stood, pulling me gently to my feet. The cocoa mugs were forgotten. He didn't pull me into a desperate embrace. He just held my hand, leading me from the small office into a more private room down the hall. It was a study, lined with books, warmed by an old iron radiator that hissed against the rain. A single, soft lamp cast everything in gold and shadow. He stopped in the center of the room, turning to face me. He still held my hand. He lifted his other hand not to my face, but to my shoulder, his thumb brushing the damp fabric of my uniform. His eyes searched mine, a silent, profound question. He was not the boss of the Argent Guild. He was not the man who had leaped a chasm carrying me on his back. He was just Marco. And he was asking permission. I gave it, not with words. I leaned forward, just a fraction, and let my breath hitch. The kiss, when it came, was not the hurried, adrenaline-fueled press in the elevator. It was a slow, deliberate unfolding. His lips were soft, tentative, learning the shape of mine. It was a question, and an answer, and a vow, all in one. His hand slid from my shoulder, up my neck, his fingers tangling in the base of my hair. The pins from the aquarium scattered and hit the wooden floor with tiny clicks. I shivered, a real tremor that had nothing to do with the cold. He felt it and paused, his forehead resting against mine. "Mara," he whispered. It was the only word he said. That tremor, that hesitation from him, broke the last of my fear. This wasn't him taking, this was him offering. I brought my hands up, not to his shoulders, but to his chest, my fingers spreading over the solid, steady beat of his heart. I gripped his shirt, pulling him closer, a silent instruction. Don't stop. He deepened the kiss, and it was everything. It was the comfort of the hot cocoa, the safety of his back in the alley, the shared breath in the tunnel. His other arm came around my waist, pulling me flush against him, and I went, melting into his strength. We moved. A slow, uncoordinated dance of exhaustion and desperate, sudden need, stumbling back until our legs hit the deep, leather sofa by the window. We fell onto it, a tangle of limbs. The rain lashed the glass, a frantic rhythm that matched the hammering in my chest. His mouth left mine, tracing a line down my jaw, to the pulse that beat wildly at the base of my throat. My head fell back against the cushions. His name. I whispered his name, a plea and a prayer. He answered with mine, his voice thick, his lips against my skin. His hand moved, tracing the outline of my back, a firm, possessive, yet reverent touch. The sound of our breathing filled the room, a ragged harmony with the storm outside. It was a fire, not of violence, but of pure, white-hot emotion. It was a shelter and it was a blaze. Later. How much later? I didn't know. The rain had softened to a steady drum. We were lying on our sides on the sofa, tangled together. My head tucked under his chin. He was stroking my hair, his touch infinitely tender. I lay listening to his heart, the same steady rhythm I'd heard in the dark alcove. "Marco," I whispered. "I'm here." I tilted my head back. We were nose to nose, our foreheads touching. "I'm not one of your soldiers," I said, the words costing me. I can't be this." His expression, so close I could see every line, softened. He kissed my forehead. "I know," he said, his voice rough. "I promise you, Mara, your life is not my chessboard. This is separate. I will never use you to win my war." A sharp, tactical knock echoed on the study door, shattering the quiet. We pulled apart, sitting up. The spell broken, I felt a sudden chill. "Come in," Marco called, his voice instantly reverting to the boss. Rhea Calder entered. She did not look at me. Her eyes were fixed on Marco, and they were like chips of ice. "Trouble," she said, "big trouble." Marco was already on his feet, buttoning his shirt, Lady Fen. "Bigger. The MCIA just announced a formal investigation. Operation Silver Axis. They're using the data we leaked, but not just on Obsidian Reaches. They're targeting all unsanctioned port activity. That means us, too. Marco, they're painting us with the same brush. They're calling us a destabilizing element. They're framing it as a turf war," Marco said, the pieces clicking into place. "Worse," Rhea said, "a source on the council just tipped me. The St. Aurelia Trade Wharf Board is calling an emergency vote in 30 days. The motion to grant exclusive control of all port logistics and security to a certified private partner to ensure public safety." I stood up, pulling my jacket, his jacket. I realized around me, what does that mean? Marco looked at me, his face grim. It means Obsidian Reaches, or a shell company they own, is about to be handed the keys to the entire city. They'll be legitimized. We'll be criminals. If we lose the docks, we lose our eyes, our ears, our entire backbone. The Argent Guild will cease to exist. Rhea nodded. "We'll be hunted, and they'll be legal." Marco turned to the window, staring out at the rain-slicked streets of his city. For a long moment, he was silent. When he turned back, his eyes were flat and cold as a blade. "We can't fight a war on two fronts. We can't fight the council and Fen. We have to cut the head off the snake. She's bleeding, but she's not dead. We have to hit her source, the place where she prints the labels, the manifests, the fake credentials." "The Orpheon," Rhea said. "The Orpheon Theater," Marco confirmed. "She's not just hiding in the shadows. She's hiding under the stage. The strategy session at Refinery Row was no longer just about survival. It was about dismantling a shadow government. We were gathered around the large, scarred wooden table, me, Marco, Rhea, and Jace. Jace was pale, but his eyes were bright, the fear replaced by a technician's focus. "They're moving too fast," Rhea said, tapping a tablet. "The MCIA announcement has given the port board all the cover they need. They're painting this as a public safety crisis. The privatization vote is a done deal unless we change the narrative. Drastically. And before dawn." "We can't just hit the Orpheon," Marco said. "We need to hit them on the street. We need to hit them in the press. We need to sever the link between Fen and the council publicly." I looked at Jace, then at Marco. What if we do both at the same time? All three of them looked at me. I was just a waitress, but I knew how to handle a rush. "You said Lady Fen is printing labels at the Orpheon," I said, my voice gaining strength. "So, we don't just destroy them. We show them. We flood the shore." "Go on," Marco said, leaning forward. "Rhea's team gets a camera inside. We start live streaming photos of the counterfeit labels, the printing plates, the chemicals. We leak it not to the press, but directly to the dock workers' union blogs, the Port Authority watchdogs. We create a public health crisis of our own. That's good, Rhea said, her fingers already flying on her tablet. It puts the council on the defensive. But that's not the hook, I said, looking at my brother. Jace, you said those mics you planted were high sensitivity. Could they create a fingerprint? Jace's eyes lit up. An acoustic fingerprint? Yes, absolutely. Every room has a unique reverb, a specific hum from its electronics. Every machine has a signature. The printers at the Orpheon. Their motors will have a specific frequency. So we mix it, I said, the plan forming fully. We take the audio from the original USB Lady Fenn's voice and we mix it with a live feed of the Orpheon's machine hum. We prove, in real time, that the woman who ran the Euphoria auction is the same person printing counterfeit drug labels. Right now, under the city. We don't just show them the crime. We sign her name to it, indelibly. Marco looked at me, a slow, deep approval in his eyes that was more intimate than the kiss we'd shared. A shoreline flood. I like it. Jace, Rhea said, turning to him, your debt with Northbridge is gone, but you're a material witness. What's your price for this A ticket to Rio? Jace looked at me, and I saw the kid I grew up with, the one who always tried to fix my bike chain and always got grease on his face. No, Jace said, I'm tired of running. I want protection, real protection. Rhea nodded once. Done. I have a contact at the Midland Ethics and Data Commission, the MEDEC. It's a new federal watchdog. You become their anonymous witness. You give them everything on Obsidian Reaches, and they put you in a very safe, very boring box until this is over. You'll be a ghost. I can do that, Jace said. All right, Marco said, standing. Rhea, the signal. We need cover for Jace's audio work. The Orpheon will be running anti-surveillance sweeps. Already handled, Rhea said, a rare, thin smile touching her lips. The Orpheon is 2 blocks from Lantern District. I'm making a charitable donation to the ancient slab drummers. I almost laughed. The slab drummers were a St. Aurelia legend, a group of street performers who played on discarded oil drums and sheets of metal. They were loud. They were beloved. And Marco's guild had personally saved their performance space from a zoning complaint 3 months ago. They'll start a rehearsal at midnight, Rhea said. It will be enough legal, ambient noise to cover any audio spikes Jace creates. It's the perfect static. Good. Marco grabbed his coat. I have a meeting. With who, I asked? The Gray Lady, City Commissioner Paloma Greaves. Paloma Greaves held her office on the 31st floor of City Hall. She was a woman who looked like she'd been carved from elegant, expensive slate. Marco walked in. Not as a crime boss, but as Mr. Fiorini. A concerned port logistics stakeholder, Rhea had a 2-man camera team outside. Commissioner, Marco said, his voice respectful, I'm here about the emergency vote. I represent a significant number of dockside businesses. We feel this private partner vote is being rushed. Greaves steepled her fingers. It's a matter of public safety. Mr. Fiorini, the events at the aquarium, the MCIA's new investigation. The port is compromised. We need a secure, unified solution. I agree, Marco said smoothly, which is why I am formally requesting a 24-hour freeze on the vote. To allow for a full public health review, there are rumors of counterfeit pharmaceuticals moving through the port. Imagine if the council voted to give control of the docks to the very people responsible for that. The public trust would be shattered. He had put her in the box. If she refused, and he leaked the rumor, she would look complicit. If she agreed, she gave him the 24 hours he needed. A public health review, she repeated, her eyes narrowing. She knew exactly what he was doing. I will take your request under advisement. Thank you, Commissioner, Marco said, placing a small, sealed file on her desk. That file contains the preliminary data. I trust you'll do what's right for the city's health. He walked out, the camera team getting a perfect shot of him leaving her office, looking like a concerned citizen. The trap was set. My job was last, and it was the one I dreaded most. I was back at the Starliner. It was 10 p.m. I was wearing my old uniform, the one that still smelled faintly of grease. I told the night manager I was picking up a forgotten check. Marco was in booth 4, the same one he'd been in that first night, nursing a black coffee, a silent guardian. Lady Fenn's people were creatures of habit. A black, windowless delivery van parked in the alley behind the diner every night at 10:15. It was her supply truck. I had a magnetic beacon, the size of a quarter, in my pocket. I pushed through the kitchen doors, my heart hammering. I was heading for the back exit when I ran straight into a ghost. It was Driggs. He was clean-shaven, his greasy hair was cut short, he was wearing a clean, pressed kitchen uniform, and his eyes were empty, lifeless. He looked like a man who had been taken apart and put back together badly. "Mara," he whispered. His voice was a dry rattle. "Driggs, what are you doing here? I thought you left." He grabbed my arm, his hand surprisingly strong. He pulled me into the dry storage pantry, his eyes wide with a terrible, chemical fear. "You can't," he hissed, his breath sour. "I came back. They let me come back. They said as long as I work, as long as I watch." "Driggs, let go of me." "Don't go to the Orpheon," he whispered, his whole body shaking. "It's not what you think. It's not a vault. It's a sacrifice. She's not just moving." "Oh, God." The world exploded. A sound like a cannon firing, and the entire front window of the diner disintegrated. Glass, sugar shakers, and menus shot across the room. Someone screamed. Marco was moving before the glass hit the floor. He launched himself from the booth, grabbing me from Driggs's grip, and hauled me down behind the solid steel counter. "Stay down," he roared, his body covering mine. Glass rained down on us. I could hear the thwack, thwack, thwack of bullets hitting the steel grill, the pop of the coffee machine exploding. Marco's arms were iron bands around me, his head down, shielding my face. I was pressed between the cold steel and the solid, living heat of his body. He looked at me. His eyes, inches from mine, were not afraid. They were fire. They were a command to be calm and a desperate plea to be safe. "Trust me." The shooting stopped, a sudden ringing silence. "He's reloading," Marco whispered, his breath hot on my ear. "One shooter across the street, second-floor window." He was trapped. We were trapped. "Driggs," Marco called, his voice tight. "The vent. Where's the intake?" Driggs was huddled by the ice machine, sobbing. He pointed a shaking finger. The side alley, the main ventilation intake. It pulls air from the alley." Marco looked at me. He didn't have to say it. I knew. I looked at the grill. A fresh pot of seafood chowder. The same damn chowder was simmering, thick and hot. "Mara, no," he said, his voice a low growl. "Yes." I said I wasn't a waitress. I was a tactician. I grabbed the heavy pot, my hands already used to the heat. "Cover me." He didn't argue. He pulled a small pistol from an ankle holster, a gun I never knew he had, and fired 3 quick shots at the second-floor window. Pop, pop, pop. The shooter ducked. Now I screamed. I scrambled from behind the counter, keeping low, and ran to the kitchen side door, which led to the alley. I kicked it open. I saw the large, slotted metal intake vent. I heard the zing of a bullet flying past my head. I didn't hesitate. I threw the entire pot of scalding hot chowder, with all my strength, directly into the slats of the ventilation intake. For a second, nothing. Then, a horrific, wet sizzle. The shooter's air conditioning unit, pulling in the hot, thick, fishy soup, vaporized it. A dense cloud of hot, greasy steam erupted from the ventilation unit on the far building, completely obscuring the window. A muffled scream of pain and confusion. "Rhea, now," Marco said into a small mic on his collar. From the alley across from us, 2 figures in black, who had been waiting for this, sprinted, grappling hooks firing. It was over in 30 seconds. We were still behind the counter when Rhea walked in, her face calm, stepping over the broken glass. "He's secured," she said. "We have him." "Obsidian reaches?" Marco asked, helping me to my feet. My legs were shaking. Rhea shook her head. "Worse. His MCIA." A cold dread, worse than the shooting, settled over me. We went into the back room. The shooter was zip-tied to a chair, his face red and blistered from the steam. He glared at Marco. "You're both dead. You're just too stupid to know it." "Why?" Marco asked, his voice quiet. "It's a legal first strike," the man spat. "Operation Silver Axis. You and Obsidian reaches. You're just two sides of the same dirty coin. You're destabilizing the port. You're a public menace." "And the privatization?" I asked, finding my voice. The man actually laughed, a harsh, barking sound. "You think this is about Fen? This is about the port. It's about national infrastructure. We can't have scum like you or her controlling it. So we let you kill each other. And when the dust settles, the MCIA and our private partners step in to restore order. The privatization vote is just a formality. The port is already ours. You're just loose ends." I looked at Marco. The realization hit us both at the same time. Lady Fen wasn't the final boss. She was just a distraction. The real enemy was an alliance of white-collar bureaucrats and corporate raiders who were about to steal the entire city in the name of order. Marco looked at the MCIA agent, and he looked at me. His face, which had been a mask of fury, settled into a terrifying calm. "The Orpheon," he said to Rhea. "Tonight. We're not just unmasking Fen, we're unmasking all of them. We're going to burn their new port down before they even get the keys." He turned to me, his eyes holding mine. The plea was gone. It was just a command. "We have to survive until dawn." The Orpheon Theater was not a building. It was a scar, buried under the cobblestones of St. Aurelia's oldest district. We entered through a collapsed sewer grate, descending a spiral iron staircase that dripped with rust and condensation. The air was a dead, cold thing, thick with the smell of mold, old stage dust, and the sharp, acidic tang of new printer's ink. From the darkness below, we heard it, not shouting, not guards. We heard the steady, rhythmic slack, clack of industrial label printers. It was the sound of a forgery factory running at full capacity. We were a three-pronged ghost. Rhea and her two best technicians had already bypassed the main security, branching off into a ventilation trunk to access the server room. Jace was half a mile away, parked in a broadcasting van, his voice a calm, disembodied presence in our earpieces. "I'm patched in." "Marco," Jace whispered, "I see their network filters. They're running a standard sweep, looking for RF signals. They won't hear me." "And the cover?" Marco asked, his voice a low rumble in the tunnel. "The slab drummers are setting up. They're loud and they're on our side. You've got a 10-minute window before they start." Marco and I took the last passage. It ended at a heavy, fireproof door. He didn't pick the lock. He pushed it open. It was unlocked. "It's a trap." I breathed, the manifest from the MCIA agent's file clutched in my hand. "It was always a trap." He said, "Let's not disappoint her." He pushed the door open, and we stepped from the pitch-black tunnel into the wings of the stage. The Orpheon was vast. The dusty velvet seats were shrouded in darkness, but the stage itself and the entire orchestra pit was illuminated by harsh, blue-white work lights. Banks of high-speed printers were arranged where the cellos and violins should have been, churning out sheets of counterfeit labels, holographic seals, and forged shipping manifests. And in the center of the stage, standing next to a humming processor as if waiting for her cue, was Lady Fen. She wore a long, silver evening coat, her hair pinned up, looking as calm as she had at the aquarium. She held a porcelain cup of tea. "I owe you a soup, little waitress," she called out, her voice unamplified, echoed perfectly in the old theater. "I must confess, I'm disappointed. You survived. And you, Marco." Bringing your new pet to a place of business, it's unprofessional. The game's over, Fen, Marco said, stepping out of the shadows. Oh, my dear boy, she laughed, a dry, brittle sound. The game hasn't even started. She gestured to a massive video screen rigged above the stage. It flickered to life, showing a live feed of Mercy Clock Square. A podium was set. Lights were on. MCIA officials and members of the port board were standing by, checking their microphones. The press conference, she said, taking a delicate sip of tea. In approximately 10 minutes, they will announce the successful containment of the Obsidian Reaches threat. Thanks to an anonymous tip, they will also announce that, due to the instability of the entire port, they are enacting an emergency measure, the privatization vote. She looked directly at Marco, her eyes gleaming with triumph. This was never about my organization. Marco, it was about yours. The MCIA needs a clean port, run by their chosen partner. They can't just seize it, but they can absorb a criminal enterprise that's been destabilizing it. They needed a villain. I was happy to play the part, but now they need a final sacrifice. When this is over, my organization will be gone, but your Argent Guild, with all its assets, will be legally seized and restructured by the new private entity. Your people, your warehouses, your entire life's work will be theirs. You'll be a footnote, and I'll be on a beach in Monaco. Marco was silent for a long moment. He looked at the screen, at her, at the running printers. It's a good plan, he finally said. He walked to the edge of the stage. But you're still thinking like a criminal. You're trying to run. We're trying to win. He kicked a heavy wooden crate that sat hidden in the wings. It slid across the dusty stage, stopping a few feet from her. What's this? She asked. Her curiosity piqued, a desperate bribe. A test plate, Marco said, for the new biologic labels, the ones you were planning to ship next week. Her eyes narrowed. She hadn't told anyone about that run. She bent down, her silver coat pooling, and unlatched the crate. Inside, on a bed of black velvet, sat a heavy, gleaming copper printing plate. It was intricate, perfect. You did this, she murmured, impressed despite herself. She reached in, her gloved fingers tracing the raised, intricate logo. Ria's work, Marco said. Lady Fen's fingers brushed the bare copper. She hissed, a sharp intake of breath, and pulled her hand back, but it was too late. She stripped off her glove, stained onto her palm like a fresh, black tattoo, was the perfect, undeniable logo of Obsidian Reaches. What is this? She snapped, rubbing at it frantically. Imaging ink, Marco said, his voice flat. Woven into the copper with nanowires, activated by body heat. It doesn't wash off for a week. Fen, you wanted to be a ghost, fine. But now you're a ghost who leaves a fingerprint on everything she touches. You're the evidence. You're the stain. Her face, for the first time, contorted in pure, unrestrained rage. You think that matters? You won't live to see that press conference. Kill them both. She smashed her hand down on a red panic button on the console. But the alarm that blared was not the one she expected. From high above, from the ventilation shafts, a thunderous, primal roar exploded into the theater. Boom-tee-tack, boom, clack, boom. The ancient slab drummers, Jace's signal. Jace! Now Marco yelled. The stage lights, the work lights, the video monitor, everything shut off. The theater was plunged into a near total blackness, broken only by the dim red emergency lights. My signal is live! Jace's voice yelled in my ear, tinny and strained over the roar of the drums. I'm flooding the press conference. Their mics are picking up nothing but white noise and drum corps. They're stalled Ria. The network is open. Downloading, Ria's voice crackled. I'm in... Lady Fen was screaming in the dark. Find them! Use your lights! Flashlight beams cut through the dusty air. Obsidian guards, at least a dozen, poured onto the stage from every entrance. Marco grabbed me. The manifests. We need the distribution list. It links her to the MCIA payroll. It's the only thing that saves us. The safe, back of the printing room. He shoved me toward the humming printers. He didn't have to fight the first two guards. He was the darkness. I heard a grunt, the wet thwack of a fist on a throat, the crack of a joint breaking. He was moving with a brutal, non-lethal economy. A guard came at me from the side, a knife flashing in the red light. I didn't scream. I grabbed the first thing I could find, a heavy, silver prop tray from a backstage rack. He lunged. I didn't block. I attacked, slamming the edge of the tray into his wrist, just as Marco had taught me. The joint push, the guard roared, the knife skittering across the floorboards. It was a marathon in a collapsing tunnel. "Ria, status," Marco yelled, using an armed guard's own momentum to slam him into a stack of ink barrels. "I've got it," she shouted over the earpiece. "The ledger, it's—" "Oh, God, Marco. The MCIA is the partner. The private entity is the MCIA. It's a hostile takeover dressed as a sting operation. I'm downloading Jace. Hold them off." "I'm trying," Jace's voice was frantic. "The drummers are drowning them, but they're rebooting their audio firewall. I've got 60 seconds. Maybe—" We reached the back wall. A heavy, old-fashioned iron safe was set into the brick. Marco grunted, holding the door, a guard's arm trapped in the jamb. I was already there. I pulled the small pick set from my pocket. It was an old tumbler lock, just like the one on Driggs's office, the one I used to steal quarters from. My hands, slick with sweat, fumbled. Focus. Mara. Click, the first pin. The roar of the drums was deafening, shaking the floor. Click, the second. "Now, Mara," Marco shouted. Click. The heavy iron handle turned. I wrenched the door open. A piercing, deafening electronic alarm, separate from the drums, screamed to life, the real alarm. "We're out of time." I didn't look. I reached in, grabbed the thick sheaf of papers, the distribution manifests, the payroll, and pulled them to my chest. "Go across the stage prop door, stage left," Marco yelled. I ran. I was a target, illuminated by a dozen scrambling flashlights. I flew across the dusty stage, no longer a waitress, but some kind of frantic, desperate dancer. A gunshot cracked the air. The first shot. They were done playing. The bullet splintered the stage floor, a foot from my head. Marco was right behind me. He grabbed a heavy wooden prop rostrum from the wings, lifting it like a shield. A second shot, a third, thudded into the thick oak. He was firing back, low, at their legs, covering my retreat. "Move, Mara." I saw the door, a painted canvas flat of a library. I hit it with my shoulder. We fell through, tumbling out into the sudden, shocking silence of a cobblestone alley. We were out. The alley was dead quiet. The only sound was the distant, muffled thud, thud, thud of Jace's drumline. The snow had stopped. The air was cold and still. We stood there, panting. The manifests clutched tight in my hand. Marco looked up, past the rooftops. The sky above Mercy Clock Tower was beginning to turn a sick, bruised gray. Dawn was coming. "It's not over," I breathed. "No," he said, reloading his pistol. "The real storm is just about to break." Mercy Clock Square was a sea of shivering bodies. The pre-dawn light was the color of a fresh bruise. Cold and gray, reporters, dock workers, and angry locals had been drawn by Jace's anonymous tips and the promise of a scandal. On the steps of the town hall, a podium was set. The MCIA officials looked polished, their smiles tight and cooperative. The port board members stood beside them, trying to look concerned. And then she arrived. Lady Fenn walked through the parted crowd as if she were on a red carpet. She wore a cream-colored wool coat, not a speck of soot from the Orpheon on her. She looked fresh, rested, and completely victorious. She took a seat in the front row, a triumphant queen ready to watch her enemies be executed. An MCIA spokesman, a man with a sharp suit and a plastic smile, stepped up to the microphone. "We are here today to address the serious security breaches at our city's vital port. After a swift and thorough investigation, we have identified and neutralized the threat posed by the Obsidian Reaches organization." He pointed to a massive video screen hung above the podium. our evidence, compiled over weeks, is absolute. Now, Ria, Marco whispered. He stood next to me, on the edge of the crowd, our faces hidden by the shadows of a stone archway. The giant screen flickered. The MCIA spokesman's smiling face vanished, replaced by a high-resolution, close-up photograph. It was Lady Fenn's hand, taken from a security camera in the Orpheon, the black, undeniable logo of Obsidian Reaches stained into her palm. The crowd gasped. Lady Fenn's smile froze. Before the spokesman could speak, the image changed. The screen filled with the grainy, damning video from the Euphoria exhibition, the video I had stolen. "That's Lady Fenn," someone shouted. "She's the one running it." The spokesman's microphone squealed. This is fabricated data. The MCIA has no record of this. The situation is under control. The port will be secured." "Jace," I breathed into the small mic on my lapel. "Hit him." From his van, miles away, Jace hit the switch. The spokesman's denial was cut off, replaced by his own voice. Recorded days earlier in a secret meeting with an Obsidian Reaches lieutenant. "The port will be secured once the private partner assumes control. Full cooperation is expected." The audio was overlaid with a precise timestamp. The spokesman turned white. That is a deep fake I never... Jace played it again, but this time he isolated the unique electronic hum of the man's office. "The port will be secured." "That's his office," a reporter yelled, recognizing the sound from a dozen press calls. "That's the acoustic fingerprint. He's lying." Lady Fenn stood up. Her face was no longer calm. It was a mask of pure fury. She pulled out her phone and speed-dialed, her voice a low hiss. "My security. Now, take the square. Take all of them." She waited. Nothing. She looked at the entrance to the square where her armored cars should have been arriving. Instead, she saw two blue and white Aurelian port office cruisers slide into place, blocking the street. On the steps of the town hall, Commissioner Paloma Greaves stepped forward, taking the microphone. "In light of this, disturbing new evidence, I have instructed the APO to secure the perimeter. We will not have a private war on city streets." Fenn stared at her. Betrayed. Paloma had made her choice. She wasn't siding with Marco. She was cutting Fenn loose to save her own skin. It happened in the new, stunned silence. I saw it first. Not the shooter. I saw the light, a tiny, star-bright glint of sun, just cresting the horizon, reflecting off something metallic on the massive, bronze face of the Mercy clock itself, a sniper, on the town hall roof. The glint shifted. It wasn't aimed at the podium. It was aimed at us, at Marco. I didn't shout. I launched myself at him, my shoulder hitting his chest with all my weight, Marco down. The crack of the rifle shot was deafening, echoing off the stone buildings. It was not a sound, it was a physical punch to the air. We fell together, crashing to the pavement, my body half covering his. I felt a sharp, violent tug at my shoulder, and then the air was filled with the smell of burnt wool. The bullet had ripped through the shoulder of his overcoat, the one I was still wearing, missing my flesh by less than an inch. I was shaking, my face pressed into his chest, my arms locked around his neck. The fear, cold and absolute, was not for myself. It was for him. The thought of that bullet hitting him, of him being gone, was a blackening, sucking void that opened under me. It clarified everything. All the fear, all the anger, all the desperate, fragile trust had become this one, sharp, undeniable thing. He rolled, pulling us from the open pavement into the meager cover of a large, bronze statue of the city's founder. He pushed me behind the pedestal, his body shielding me, his gun out, his eyes scanning the rooftops. "Are you hit?" he demanded, his voice a low, rough growl. "No. It was the coat. I was breathing in ragged gasps." He grabbed my face, his hands hard and cold, forcing me to look at him. His eyes were wild. "You are not my shield. Mara, ever. Do you understand me?" The raw terror in his voice, the same terror I felt, broke through my shock. You shielded me, I whispered, my hands coming up to grip his wrists. You stood in front of me at the diner. You shielded me in the alley. You shielded me on the stage. Let me return it, just this once. The world outside our small, bronze sanctuary was chaos, shouts, sirens, people running. But behind the statue, time stopped. His gaze dropped from my eyes to my mouth. The anger in his face warred with something else, something deeper and more desperate. He leaned his forehead against mine, his gun still in his hand, but his focus entirely on me. It wasn't a slow-burning seduction. It was a lifeline. He kissed me. It was fast, hard, and deep, a desperate locking of mouths in the middle of a war zone. It was not gentle. It was a frantic, wordless vow. His lips were chapped from the cold, and mine were trembling. His hand left my wrist and tangled in my hair, pulling me closer. It was a kiss that said, "We are alive," it said. After all this, we still have each other. It was over in a second, but it sealed a promise that would last a lifetime. We broke apart, our breath pluming, our foreheads still touching. "We have to move," he breathed. The battle for the square was now a media war. Lady Fenn, realizing her muscle was gone, played her final card. She was live streaming from her own phone, her voice calm and authoritative. "As you can see, the real terrorist is Marco Fiorini," she broadcasted, her face a mask of false sincerity. "He has destabilized this city. I have here a file." She held up a USB drive, proving his connections to the very contraband he claims to fight. He is the disease. Rhea Marco yelled into his mic. "Answer her, now." "On it," Rhea's voice came back, cold and calm. The giant screen above the podium flickered again. Fenn's face was replaced by a simple, scanned document. It was titled, "The Argent Code, Section 1. A voiceover began, deep and resonant, a dock worker, one of Marco's oldest allies. Article 1. No member of the Argent Guild will traffic in human lives, poison or weapons. The screen changed. Article 2, 10% of all guild tariffs will be held in the Storm Fund for the aid of any port family displaced by disaster. The screen filled with photos, not of crimes, but of the Argent Guild rebuilding a dockside clinic after a fire, of guild members handing out blankets during the last winter freeze. A roar went up, but this time it was from the dock workers. They surged forward, past the police tape, forming a protective wall in front of the statue. Their faces turned not toward Marco, but toward the MCIA officials. The spokesman at the podium looked at the crowd, at Fenn, at the screen. He was trapped. He leaned into the mic. This press conference is temporarily suspended. The MCIA will reevaluate the data. The port board members scrambled behind him. The port board declares a full, independent investigation into all parties, one of them shouted, before running for his car. The crowd cheered as two APO officers, acting on Paloma's orders, began slapping a ticket on Lady Fenn's illegally parked car. It was a small, symbolic victory, but it was a victory. It looked like we had won. And then, a black SUV parked 2 blocks down exploded. The concussion wave hit us, a wall of hot air and sound. It was a diversion, a perfect, devastating diversion. Marco was already moving, pulling me toward the town hall, his eyes scanning for Fenn. She was gone. She had vanished into the screaming, panicked crowd. The only thing left was her chair, in the front row, and on it, a single, white envelope. Marco ripped it open. It wasn't a letter. It was a single, elegant card with 3 words written in her perfect silver script. "Final game. The waterworks, Marco said, his voice flat. He was staring at the card, but his eyes were 1,000 miles away. "It's the old river diversion plant, under the embankment, by the West Briar Bridge. It's where you go to make things disappear. The main outflow valves dump directly into the deep shipping channel." Rhea and Jace met us at the service entrance, their faces grim in the gray dawn. "It's the perfect shredder," Jace said, his hands already flying over a portable console. "She'll dump all her master copies. all the physical plates from the Orpheon, everything. She'll flush it all into the lake. She'll flood the tunnels, Rhea added, pulling up a schematic. The entire lower level is a maze of pressure valves. It's a suicide trap. Marco looked at me. His face was a mask of cold resolve. Rhea, get Jace to a safe distance. Mara, you go with them. This is my fight. I stared at him, at the man who had stood in front of me, shielded me, kissed me. No, I said. My voice didn't shake. Mara, this isn't a request. That's an order. You're out. I'm not one of your soldiers. Remember, I stepped closer, my hands clenched at my sides. I'm not your pet. I'm not your anything. I'm the woman who stole the drive. I'm the one who threw the soup. I'm the one she's truly angry with. This isn't your fight, or my fight. It's our fight. I saw the conflict in his eyes, the iron will of the guild leader warring with the man who had held me in the study. There is no your people, or my people anymore. Marco, I said, my voice quiet but fierce, there is only us. We started this at the Starliner. We finish it at the waterworks. I'm not asking. I'm coming. He stared at me for a long, silent moment. The sirens were fading, the city holding its breath. He didn't argue. He didn't command. He just gave me a single, sharp nod, the nod of an equal, the nod of a partner. The inside of the waterworks was a cathedral of rust and dripping water. Catwalks crisscrossed a massive, dark chamber. Below us, a series of enormous, 6-foot-wide pipes converged on a central filtering pool. The air was cold, vibrating with the low, deep hum of ancient machinery. And in the center of the main catwalk, illuminated by a single, sickly green work light, stood Lady Fen. She was alone. "Love," she called out, her voice echoing. "It's so inefficient. It makes you slow, Marco. It makes you predictable." "It's over, Fen!" Marco yelled, his voice a flat, hard echo. He and I were on the upper gantry, looking down. "Is it?" She gestured to the wall behind her. It was a complex array of massive, red-painted wheels, the pressure valves. This is a very old system, my dears. Finicky. You see, these 3 main valves control the outflow. Turn them in the wrong sequence, or with the wrong timing, and the pressure feedback will rupture the intake pipe. It will flood this entire chamber in about 90 seconds. She held up a small, silver lighter. Below her, in the dry filtering pool, was a mountain of paper, the manifests, the payrolls, the printing plates, and, splashed all over them, was gasoline. "So, you have a choice," Fen smiled. "Try to take me, and I light the fire. The evidence burns, or you can try for the valves, but one wrong move, and the evidence is washed away. Either way, I win, and you drown." "Jace," Marco whispered into his mic, "can you hear it?" "I hear it." Jace's voice crackled in our ears. The hum, the machines, the water pressure in the pipes has a specific acoustic resonance. I can hear the flow. I think I can time the valve sequence, if you can get to them. "Rhea, schematics," Marco ordered. "I see them," Rhea's voice cut in, sharp and fast. "It's a 3-valve sequence. Alpha, gamma, beta. But Jace is right. The timing is critical. You have to turn them in order, with exactly a 3-second delay between each. Jace, you have to count the pressure." "On it," Jace said. "Marco, Mara, you have to be my hands." The 4 of us, a boss, a waitress, a hacker, and a sound tech, we were a team. Fen, Marco yelled, "Moving along the gantry, you lost. The MCIA knows. The council knows." "They know what I told them." To know, she screamed, her calm finally breaking. "They were my puppets. You just cut the strings, but I am still the one holding the match." That's when she triggered the flush. She didn't run for the valves. She hit a master switch on the wall. A deafening alarm blared. Water began to gush from the intake, pouring into the dry pool, rising fast. "She's skipping the sequence. She's just gonna flood it," Jace yelled. "Marco, the master valve. It's the only way to stop the inflow," Rhea shouted. "It's on the lower level now." Marco didn't hesitate. He vaulted over the railing, dropping 10 feet to the catwalk below. and sprinted for the massive red wheel that controlled the main flow. Lady Fen saw him. She ran, not for the exit, but for me. She was coming to finish the little waitress. I ran to meet her. Marco reached the valve. He grabbed the iron wheel and pulled. It didn't budge. Rusted solid, and he braced his feet, his entire body straining, the muscles in his back and arms cording. The water was rising, already swirling around the base of the paper mountain. Fen lunged at me, but she wasn't a brawler. She was an executive. I was a waitress. I had spent 10 years carrying overloaded trays, dodging drunks, and balancing scalding pots. My speed was my weapon. She grabbed for my hair. I ducked, pivoting on my heel, letting her momentum carry her past me. She spun, surprised by my agility. "Jace!" Count Marco roared, his face purple with strain. The wheel began to turn, one agonizing inch at a time. "I can't, the water. The noise is too much. I'm losing the sequence." Jace sounded panicked. Fen came at me again. This was her world leverage, timing and finding the weak point. But it was my world, too. She pushed and I pulled. She grabbed and I twisted. We were locked in a strange, desperate dance. Our hands locked, circling each other on the narrow, wet catwalk. "Marco," I screamed. He was still fighting the wheel. His eyes were locked on me. He couldn't help. This was my fight. His gaze wasn't afraid. It was pure, unadulterated trust. He knew I could hold her. He was betting his life on it. Fen saw the trust in his eyes, and it made her furious. "You took everything," she hissed, and her hand broke free. She pulled a knife, a thin, stiletto-like blade I hadn't seen. She slashed. I threw my arm up. The blade was fast. I felt a sudden, searing, hot line of pain across my forearm, a deep graze. But the pain cleared my head. She lunged again, aiming for my stomach. I didn't step back. I grabbed the first thing I saw on a nearby workbench, a flat, heavy metal tool tray. I met her lunge, not with force, but with an echo of the diner. I didn't block. I served. I slammed the flat side of the tray into her wrist, using her own forward momentum against her. The joint push Marco had taught me. The bone in her wrist snapped with a wet, sickening crack. The knife clattered to the steel grating. Lady Fen screamed, a raw animal sound of pain and defeat. "Jace!" Now I yelled, kicking the knife into the water. "I have it." "The sound is clear." Jace's voice was triumphant. "Marco, stop, hold it there. 3, 2, 1. Mara, the second valve to your left, turn it now." I leaped to the wheel Fen had been guarding. I threw my entire body into it. It spun. Good. 2 seconds, Marco, the third valve to your right now. Marco let go of the master wheel and lunged, spinning the final valve. There was a groaning, shuddering thump that shook the entire building. The alarms cut off. The sound of rushing water stopped. Silence. The water was inches from the gasoline-soaked evidence, but it was safe. We stood, pantin' in the green, dripping quiet. Lady Fen was on her knees, cradling her broken wrist. She looked at the saved evidence, at me, at Marco. She was shaking, her face pale and exhausted. "I lost," she whispered. "I lost on patience." Marco walked over, his chest heaving, his eyes never leaving her. "You lost," he said, his voice a low growl. "The moment you underestimated a waitress." The heavy steel doors of the waterworks burst open. Floodlights, MCIA agents, a dozen of them swarmed in. Weapons raised. "Freeze hands in the air, all of you." They had come to arrest everyone, the victor and the vanquished. "Stand down, Agent." A new voice. Paloma Greaves walked in, flanked by 2 uniformed APO officers. She was holding a single, official document. "By order of the city, and in light of the ongoing public health crisis, I am enacting a 30-day emergency guardianship of the St. Aurelia port," she announced. "All privatization votes are frozen." The lead MCIA agent stared at her. "Commissioner, this is a federal crime scene." "It is," Paloma agreed smoothly, "and I have a preliminary report for you." She handed him a file. It confirms that Lady Fenn, a known operative of the now-defunct Obsidian Reaches, was the sole source of the counterfeit materials. It also notes that the Argent Guild, she nodded coolly at Marco, was instrumental in assisting this investigation and preserving the evidence. Thank you for your service. Agent, the APO will take custody of the prisoner. She had done it. She had drawn the line. Not a clean line, but a gray one. A line we could all live with. The snow was melting. From the balcony of the glass hollow, I watched the water drip from the mandarin trees. The city, washed clean, looked almost peaceful. The smell of rosemary and citrus was now joined by the smell of roasting garlic and, yes, seafood chowder. I had opened my own place, right in the ground floor of Marco's building, a small, clean, bright cafe. I called it Soup and Stars. The bell over the door jingled. I looked down from the balcony and saw my new prep cook, Driggs. He was clean, sober, and his hands, for the first time, were steady. He nodded at me and got to work chopping onions. The bell jingled again. Marco walked in. He wasn't wearing an overcoat, just a simple dark sweater. He looked lighter. He didn't come to the counter. He sat at table 3, my worst station. I came downstairs, wiping my hands on my apron, a clean one. He didn't say hello. He just looked at me, his gaze as steady and safe as a harbor. He reached out and touched a small, silver spoon on the table, setting it straight. "Stay home with me," he said, his voice quiet. I looked at him, at the clean tables, the warm soup, the man who had seen all the broken parts of me and never once looked away. I smiled. At our home. Outside, the great bell of Mercy clock began to ring, signaling the noon hour. The final knot was untied. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I would love to connect with you. So please comment below and let me know where in the world you are listening from and share your thoughts. Please subscribe to my channel, Mafia Boss Stories, and like this video. And if you want to support this channel even more, please hit the hype button to help this story be heard by more people.